The moment a powerful CEO realized her rescuer was the homeless man she'd once dismissed, everything changed forever. What if I told you that a single act of courage could shatter the walls between two worlds? What if the person you judged harshest became your greatest hero? Tonight, I'm sharing a story that will challenge everything you think you know about worth, dignity, and the power of human compassion. Stay with me until the very end. This story has a twist that will leave you speechless. And please comment below with your city so I can see how far this message of hope travels across the world. The rain hammered against the cracked windows of the abandoned warehouse where Ethan Collins had made his home. Not by choice, but by circumstance, the kind that strips away everything you thought you knew about your place in the world. He pulled the thin blanket tighter around his sleeping daughter, Maya. Her small frame curled against the dampness that seemed to seep into everything, including their dreams. "Daddy, I'm cold," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm raging outside. Ethan's heart clenched as he looked down at his 7-year-old daughter, her dark hair matted against her forehead, her clothes, the only ones she owned, wrinkled and worn. 3 months ago, they'd had a home. He'd had a job at the construction site, steady work that put food on the table and kept the lights on in their small apartment. But a workplace accident had shattered more than just his leg. It had destroyed their entire world. "I know, sweetheart," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "Just a little longer, okay? Tomorrow Daddy will find us something better." It was the same promise he'd made every night for the past month since they'd been evicted from their apartment. The same lie that tasted more bitter each time it passed his lips. But what else could he tell her that her father, who used to lift steel beams and build foundations for other people's dreams, couldn't even provide his own child with a proper bed? Maya nodded sleepily, trusting him the way children do, completely unconditionally. That trust was both his greatest blessing and his heaviest burden. Across the city, in a gleaming penthouse that cost more per month than most people made in a year, Victoria Hale stood before floor-to-ceiling windows, surveying her empire. At 34, she commanded one of the most successful tech companies on the East Coast. Hale Tech Industries had revolutionized data security, making Victoria not just wealthy, but powerful, the kind of powerful that opened doors, commanded respect, and insulated her from the messy realities of the world below. Her reflection stared back at her from the window, sharp cheekbones, platinum blonde hair, pulled back in a perfect chignon, wearing a designer dress that cost more than many people's monthly salary. She had everything she'd ever worked for, everything she'd sacrificed. Relationships, sleep, and her youth to achieve. So why did she feel so empty, ma'am? Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your car is ready for the charity gala." Victoria sighed, checking her diamond watch. Another evening of writing checks to causes she'd never personally witnessed, surrounded by people who measured worth in stock portfolios and quarterly earnings. But it was part of the game, part of maintaining the image that kept Hale Tech at the top. "I'll be right down, Rebecca." She grabbed her purse, a limited edition piece that could have fed a family for months, and headed for the private elevator. As she descended from her ivory tower, she had no idea that 12 blocks away, a man was holding his daughter close, wondering if tomorrow would be the day he finally broke his promise. The gala was held at the Meridian Hotel, the kind of place where champagne flowed like water, and the chandeliers cost more than most people's houses. Victoria moved through the crowd, with practiced ease, her smile polished and professional, her handshake firm enough to command respect, but not so strong as to intimidate potential business partners. "Victoria, darling, you look stunning as always." Margaret Sinclair, wife of a tech rival, air-kissed Victoria's cheeks. "That dress is divine. Valentino. Custom," Victoria replied smoothly, though she couldn't remember the designer's name. They all blended together after a while. "You must tell me your secret. How do you manage to look so put together while running such a demanding empire?" Victoria's smile never wavered. "Good genes and better coffee." The crowd laughed, but Victoria felt the familiar hollow echo in her chest. These people weren't her friends. They were networking opportunities, strategic alliances, stepping stones in the endless climb to the top. She'd chosen this life-traded authentic connection for professional success. But lately, the trade felt increasingly hollow. Meanwhile, Ethan was making his own difficult choices. Maya had been running a fever all day, her small body burning up despite the cold warehouse. He'd spent their last few dollars on children's medicine, but it wasn't helping. She needed to see a doctor, but the free clinic wouldn't open until morning, and he wasn't sure she could wait that long. "Daddy, my tummy hurts." Maya whimpered, her face flushed with fever. Ethan pressed his hand to her forehead, feeling the heat radiating from her skin. He'd been sick plenty of times since they'd been on the streets. Hunger, exhaustion, and exposure took their toll. But watching his daughter suffer was unbearable. "I'm going to find help, baby girl," he said, scooping her up in his arms. She felt so light, too light. When was the last time she'd had a proper meal? He wrapped her in the blanket and stepped out into the storm. The rain hit them immediately, soaking through their thin clothes. Maya shivered against him, and Ethan quickened his pace, heading toward the better part of town where the hospitals were. The Meridian Hotel blazed with light as Victoria's evening wore on. She'd written 3 checks, made 4 business connections, and endured countless conversations about market projections and investment opportunities. Now, as the evening wound down, she found herself on the hotel's covered terrace, needing a moment of fresh air before the drive home. The rain had intensified, turning the streets into rivers of neon reflections. Victoria watched from her dry, luxurious perch as a few stragglers hurried past with umbrellas and expensive coats. Her driver would pull up momentarily, and she'd be whisked back to her penthouse, where she'd review tomorrow's meetings over a glass of wine that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. She checked her phone, scrolling through emails that couldn't wait until morning, when she heard a child's cry, weak but desperate, cutting through the sound of rain. Victoria looked up from her screen, scanning the street below. There, under a broken streetlight, she saw them, a man carrying a small bundle, moving with the desperate urgency of someone running out of options. Even from a distance, she could see they were soaked through the man's clothes, hanging off his thin frame like rags. For a moment, something stirred in Victoria's chest, a flicker of recognition, not of the man, but of desperation itself. She'd been so far removed from that kind of need that she'd almost forgotten it existed. Almost. Then her phone buzzed with another email, and the moment passed. She looked back down at her screen at the quarterly projections and board meeting schedules that demanded her attention. By the time she looked up again, the street was empty. Her driver pulled up in a sleek black sedan, and Victoria slipped into the leather interior, the heated seats immediately warming her silk-stockinged legs. As they drove through the storm, she caught glimpses of the city's other face through rain-streaked windows, people huddled in doorways, a woman pushing a shopping cart full of belongings, a man holding a cardboard sign at a traffic light. Victoria had always been good at not seeing these things, at focusing on her own world, her own challenges. It was easier that way, cleaner. She couldn't save everyone, she told herself. She had her own responsibilities, her own battles to fight. But tonight, something was different. Maybe it was the child's cry still echoing in her ears, or the way the rain made everything look washed and vulnerable. Whatever it was, she found herself really looking at the faces they passed, seeing the desperation, the exhaustion, the quiet dignity of people who'd lost everything but kept going anyway. Ethan, meanwhile, had reached the emergency room of St. Mary's Hospital only to be turned away. Without insurance, without an address, without the proper documentation, Maya's fever wasn't considered urgent enough for immediate care. They'd have to wait for the free clinic to open in the morning. "Please." Ethan had begged the triage nurse, Maya's fevered body limp in his arms. "She's just a little girl. She needs help." But the system had rules, procedures, protocols that didn't bend for desperation or a father's love. They'd been directed to the waiting area with the other forgotten people, the addicts, the mentally ill, the ones society had labeled as problems rather than people. Now they sat on hard plastic chairs under fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered, Maya's head on Ethan's lap, her breathing shallow and labored. He stroked her hair and whispered stories, the same ones his own father had told him when he was small, and the world seemed safe and predictable. "Tell me about the princess again," Maya whispered, her voice hoarse. Ethan smiled, though his heart was breaking. "Once upon a time there was a princess who lived in a tall tower, high above all the troubles of the world." As he spoke, he watched the other people in the waiting room. An elderly man with a persistent cough, a young woman with track marks on her arms, a teenager who'd clearly been in a fight. All of them waiting, hoping, praying that someone would see them as more than their circumstances. "Did the princess ever come down from her tower?" Maya asked. Ethan paused, looking out the hospital windows at the storm still raging outside. Somewhere out there, in gleaming towers and comfortable homes, people were living lives untouched by this kind of desperation. They were the princesses and princes of the modern world, elevated above the struggles of people like him and Maya. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly. "But maybe she should." Victoria's penthouse felt smaller that night, despite its vast square footage. She stood again at her windows, but instead of seeing her reflection, she found herself looking down at the streets below, wondering about the stories playing out in the darkness. She poured herself a glass of wine, a vintage that wine collectors would kill for, but it tasted flat, lifeless. Everything in her life was the best money could buy, but when was the last time she'd felt truly satisfied? Her phone rang, interrupting her brooding. It was James Crawford, her business partner, and the closest thing she had to a friend. "How was the charity circuit tonight?" he asked, his voice warm with the easy familiarity of someone who'd known her for years. "The usual. Wrote some checks, made some connections, pretended to care about causes I'll never see up close." James chuckled. "Cynical even for you. What's eating at you, Vic?" Victoria considered the question. What was eating at her? The emptiness. The growing sense that all her success meant nothing if she was the only one benefiting from it. "Do you ever think about the people we don't see?" she asked suddenly. "What do you mean, Tom?" "The ones who aren't in our meetings, our galas, our world. The ones we step over to get where we're going." There was a pause. "That's pretty philosophical for a Tuesday night. Where's this coming from?" Victoria couldn't explain it herself. "I saw something tonight. A man carrying a sick child in the rain. And I wondered what their story was." "Victoria, you can't save everyone. You know that, right? We've built something amazing with Hailtech. We employ thousands of people. We've revolutionized data security. We contribute to the economy. That's our contribution to the world." He was right, of course. She knew he was right. But tonight, his logical arguments felt hollow. After they hung up, Victoria found herself unable to sleep. She wandered her penthouse, surrounded by the fruits of her success, original artwork, designer, furniture technology that most people could only dream of owning. But none of it filled the growing void in her chest. She thought about her childhood, growing up in a middle-class family where her mother had volunteered at soup kitchens and her father had coached Little League for free. When had she stopped seeing people and started seeing only opportunities. Then had her heart become as cold and efficient as her business strategies. Back at the hospital, Maya's fever had broken just before dawn. Ethan felt her small body relax against him, her breathing evening out for the first time in hours. He closed his eyes in relief, whispering a prayer of gratitude to whoever might be listening. "Sir?" A young doctor approached them, her scrubs wrinkled from a long shift. "I can take a look at your daughter now." Dr. Sarah Chen had been working double shifts since her residency began, but something about this father and daughter had caught her attention. Maybe it was the way he'd held his child all night, never complaining, never demanding, just waiting with the patient dignity of someone who'd learned not to expect much from the world. "She had a fever," Ethan explained gently, shaking Maya awake. "It broke about an hour ago, but I wanted to make sure." "Of course. Let's have a look." Dr. Chen's examination was thorough but gentle. Maya, still drowsy but alert, answered her questions with the serious consideration children give to important adults. "When did you last eat?" Dr. Chen asked quietly. Maya looked at her father, uncertainty in her eyes. "Yesterday morning." Ethan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chen nodded, making notes. "She's dehydrated and undernourished, but the fever was likely just a common virus made worse by her overall condition. I'm going to get her some IV fluids and something to eat." As she walked away, Ethan felt tears threaten for the first time since this nightmare began. Not from despair, but from relief. Someone had seen them, really seen them, and offered help without judgment. "Daddy, is the nice doctor going to make me feel better?" Maya asked. "Yes, baby girl. She's going to make you feel much better." While Maya received IV fluids, Ethan sat beside her hospital bed watching color return to her cheeks. Dr. Chen had also quietly provided them with sandwiches and juice, and Maya was eating with an appetite he hadn't seen in weeks. "Mr. Collins," Dr. Chen returned with a clipboard. "I need to ask about your living situation. For Maya's health, she needs a stable environment, regular meals, protection from the elements." Ethan's heart sank. He knew what this meant: social services, foster care, his daughter taken from him because he couldn't provide what she needed. "Please," he said, his voice cracking, "don't take her away from me. I know I can't give her much, but I love her. I'm trying to find work to get us back on our feet. She's all I have." Dr. Chen's expression softened. "I'm not here to separate families, Mr. Collins, but I am legally obligated to ensure Maya's safety and health. There are resources available: shelters, job placement programs, assistance programs. Would you be willing to accept help?" The word help had become foreign to Ethan over the past few months. He'd tried the shelters, but they were overcrowded and often more dangerous than the streets. He'd applied for assistance, but the bureaucracy was a maze designed to discourage rather than aid. But looking at his daughter, seeing her smile as she ate, he knew he had to swallow his pride. "Yes," he said simply. "I'll take any help you can give us." As the morning sun filtered through the hospital windows, Victoria was beginning another day in her tower, unaware that 12 blocks away, a father was learning to accept kindness from strangers. She dressed in her armor of designer suits and perfect makeup, preparing for another day of battles fought in boardrooms rather than emergency room waiting areas. But something had shifted in the night. As she reviewed her schedule board meeting, investor call, product launch, planning the numbers and projections seemed less important than they had just 24 hours ago. She found herself distracted, wondering about the man with the sick child, hoping they'd found the help they needed. Her assistant knocked on her office door. "Ms. Hale, the board is ready for you." Victoria straightened her shoulders, pushing aside her wandering thoughts. She had responsibilities, obligations, a company to run. Whatever momentary empathy the storm had stirred in her would have to wait. The business world didn't pause for philosophical crises. But as she walked toward the boardroom, she couldn't shake the image of that desperate figure in the rain, carrying precious cargo through a world that had forgotten how to care. She didn't know it yet, but that image would haunt her in the coming days, slowly cracking the walls she'd built around her heart. And somewhere across the city, Ethan was filling out paperwork for temporary housing assistance. His daughter sleeping peacefully in a hospital bed, both of them about to begin a journey that would eventually intersect with Victoria's in ways neither could imagine. The storm had passed, but its effects were just beginning to ripple through two lives that seemed worlds apart, but were connected by invisible threads of fate, circumstance, and the strange alchemy that transforms strangers into the most important people in each other's lives. In the days that followed, both Victoria and Ethan would discover that sometimes the universe has a way of putting exactly the right people in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment, not for convenience or comfort, but for the kind of transformation that only comes when everything you think you know about yourself gets turned upside down by a single act of unexpected courage. The temporary housing facility smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. Ethan carried Maya through the narrow hallways past doors that hid stories of loss and struggle similar to their own. Room 247 would be their home for the next 30 days, a small space with 2 single beds, a tiny bathroom, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. "It's not much, sweetheart," Ethan said, setting Maya down gently on one of the beds. "But it's dry and it's warm." Maya bounced slightly on the thin mattress, her eyes wide with wonder. After weeks of sleeping on concrete floors, this felt like luxury. "Can I really have my own bed, Daddy?" "Yes, baby girl, your very own bed." That night, as Maya slept soundly for the first time in months, Ethan lay staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city filtering through the thin walls. Tomorrow, he would start looking for work again. Chen had connected him with a job placement program, and for the first time since the accident, he felt a flicker of hope. 3 miles away, Victoria was having trouble sleeping too, but for entirely different reasons. She stood in her marble bathroom, removing the mask of perfection she wore each day, the makeup, the jewelry, the carefully constructed facade that kept the world at arm's length. In the mirror, without all the armor, she looked younger, more vulnerable, more human. The memory of the man in the rain wouldn't leave her alone. She'd tried to dismiss it as a moment of weakness, an anomaly in her otherwise focused existence. But something about his desperation had awakened something in her that she'd thought was long dead, her capacity to truly see other people's pain. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Early meeting tomorrow. The Henderson acquisition needs finalizing." Victoria stared at the message, feeling a strange disconnect from the words. The Henderson acquisition would add another $50 million to Hailtech's value-secure jobs for her existing employees and cement her position as one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs on the East Coast. It should have excited her. Instead, it felt empty, meaningless. She set the phone aside without responding and walked to her window. The city spread out below her like a circuit board, all lights and connections. But she found herself wondering about the dark spaces between the illumination, the places where people like the man with the sick child fought their battles in silence. The next morning brought new challenges for both of them. Ethan arrived at the job placement center at 7 sharp, dressed in his cleanest shirt and the one pair of pants that didn't have holes. The counselor, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, reviewed his file with practiced efficiency. "Construction work is hard to come by right now," she said gently. "The injury to your leg, the gap in your employment history, it's going to be challenging. But I have some possibilities." She handed him a list of potential employers, warehouse work, security positions, cleaning services. None paid particularly well, but any income was better than none. The security job at the Meridian Hotel is probably your best bet, Mrs. Rodriguez said. Night shift, decent pay, and they're specifically looking for someone who can start immediately. The Meridian Hotel. Ethan remembered passing it on their desperate journey to the hospital, seeing the warm lights and well-dressed people through rain-streaked windows. It had seemed like another world than one he could never be part of. Now perhaps he could at least work in its shadows. "I'll take it," he said without hesitation. Meanwhile, Victoria was dealing with her own professional obligations. The board meeting dragged on for 3 hours, filled with the usual corporate speak about market penetration, quarterly projections, and strategic positioning. She participated with her usual sharp insights and decisive leadership, but part of her mind kept wandering to that figure in the storm. "Victoria," James's voice cut through her distraction. "The Henderson acquisition papers." She looked up, realizing the entire room was waiting for her response. "Yes, of course. Rebecca will have them ready by end of day." After the meeting, James lingered. "You seem distracted lately. Everything okay?" Victoria considered telling him about her strange preoccupation with the homeless man and his child, but she knew how it would sound. James was practical, results-oriented, focused on the bottom line. He wouldn't understand this sudden crisis of conscience. "Just tired," she said instead. "The Henderson deal has been consuming. Maybe you should take some time off after it's finalized." "When's the last time you took a real vacation?" Victoria couldn't remember. Vacations were inefficient time away from the empire she'd built with such single-minded determination. "I'll think about it." That evening, as Victoria attended another networking event, this time at a high-end restaurant downtown, Ethan was starting his first shift at the Meridian Hotel. The uniform felt strange after months of wearing the same worn clothes, but he was grateful for the work, grateful for the chance to rebuild. His supervisor, Mr. Henderson, no relation to the acquisition keeping Victoria busy, was a no-nonsense man in his 50s who'd worked security for 20 years. "Your job is simple," Henderson explained as they walked through the hotel's gleaming lobby. "Keep the guests safe, keep the undesirables out, and don't cause any scenes. The Meridian caters to a very exclusive clientele. Celebrities, business executives, politicians. Discretion is everything." Ethan nodded, understanding the subtext. He was to be invisible, a guardian who protected wealth and privilege without calling attention to himself. It was honest work, and he was grateful for it, but the irony wasn't lost on him. He who had nothing would now spend his nights protecting those who had everything. As Henderson showed him the security stations and protocols, Ethan caught glimpses of the hotel's other world, the one he'd seen from the outside that rainy night. Well-dressed guests moved through the lobby with the casual confidence of people who'd never doubted their place in the world. They spoke in the language of stock options and European vacations, their problems measured in percentage points rather than missed meals. "The evening crowd is usually pretty tame," Henderson was saying. "Business dinners, hotel guests, the occasional private event. But stay alert. Sometimes you get troublemakers trying to get in, homeless people looking for a warm place to sleep, that sort of thing." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his expression neutral. "Understood." The evening passed quietly. Ethan walked his rounds, checking doors and monitoring the lobby, learning to move through this world of marble and crystal without disturbing its carefully maintained atmosphere. Around 10 o'clock, he saw a familiar figure emerge from the elevator. A woman in an expensive dress, platinum blonde hair, perfectly styled, moving with the kind of confidence that came from commanding boardrooms and making million-dollar decisions. Victoria Hale swept through the lobby like she owned it, which Ethan realized she probably could if she wanted to. He'd seen her picture in business magazines during his previous life, when he'd still had time to read about successful people doing important things. She was even more striking in person, beautiful, in the sharp, untouchable way of someone who'd armored herself in success. She paused at the concierge desk, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet lobby. "Charles, I need a car to take me to the Whitmore Gallery opening." "Of course, Ms. Hale. Right away." As Victoria waited, she glanced around the lobby with the absent attention of someone who'd seen it all before. Her eyes passed over Ethan without recognition, without seeing him at all. To her, he was part of the scenery, as invisible as the marble columns or crystal chandeliers. But Ethan saw her clearly. He saw the way she held herself apart from everyone around her, the careful distance she maintained even with the hotel staff who knew her by name. He saw the loneliness that expensive clothes and perfect makeup couldn't quite hide. Victoria's car arrived, and she disappeared into the night, leaving only the faint scent of expensive perfume and the echo of designer heels on marble. Ethan returned to his rounds, but something had shifted in his understanding of the divide between their worlds. She might have everything money could buy, but she seemed as isolated in her tower as he had been in his warehouse. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Ethan worked his shifts learning the hotel's patterns and protocols, while Maya attended a nearby school, her first stable education in months. The temporary housing facility had its own challenges, but it was secure, warm, and gave them the foundation they needed to rebuild. Victoria, meanwhile, found herself increasingly restless. The Henderson acquisition was proceeding smoothly, her company's stock price was climbing, and by every metric that mattered to her world, she was succeeding brilliantly. So why did she feel like she was failing at something more important? She started taking different routes to work, driving through parts of the city she'd previously avoided. She saw the homeless camps under highway overpasses, the lines at food banks, the faces of people who'd fallen through society's cracks. Each glimpse felt like a small wound to her carefully constructed worldview. "You're doing it again," James said during their weekly strategy meeting. "That distant thing where you're physically here but mentally somewhere else." Victoria forced herself to focus on the presentation slides. "Sorry, what were you saying about the quarterly projections?" "I wasn't. I was asking if you're okay." "Victoria, we've been partners for 8 years. I know when something's bothering you." She looked at him across the polished conference table, this man who knew her business mind better than anyone, but had never really known her heart. How could she explain that success felt hollow when it came at the cost of her humanity? "Do you ever think about the people who didn't make it?" she asked suddenly. "The ones who didn't get the breaks we got, who didn't have the opportunities." James leaned back in his chair. "Survivor's guilt. Victoria, you earned everything you have. You worked 18-hour days for years. You sacrificed personal relationships. You took risks that could have destroyed you. Don't diminish that because other people made different choices. But what if they didn't make different choices, yet if they just didn't have the same options? Where is this coming from? This isn't like you." Victoria didn't answer because she didn't know how to explain that a stranger's desperation had cracked something open in her chest, letting in light and air, and the uncomfortable realization that her success meant nothing if she was the only one it touched. That night, she found herself at the Meridian Hotel, again not for business, but because she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to be there. She sat in the bar, nursing a glass of wine that cost more than some people mought in a day, watching the ebb and flow of privilege around her. "Another wine, Ms. Hale?" the bartender asked. "No, thank you, Marcus. I'm fine." As she sat there, she noticed the security guard making his rounds. There was something familiar about his careful, measured movements, the way he observed without intruding. He was older than the usual hotel security, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of hard experience. When he passed near the bar, Victoria found herself studying him more closely. There was dignity in his bearing, despite the simple uniform, a quiet strength that seemed earned rather than assumed. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw intelligence there, and pain, and something else, recognition. Ethan felt his breath catch as Victoria Hale looked directly at him for the first time. For just a moment, the invisible barrier between their worlds thinned, and he saw something unexpected in her carefully controlled expression. Uncertainty. Maybe even vulnerability. "Excuse me," Victoria called softly as he passed. "Could I ask you something?" Ethan approached the bar cautiously. "Of course, ma'am." "How long have you worked here?" "About a week." Victoria nodded, studying his face. There was something about him that seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it. "Do you like it?" "The work, I mean." It was an unusual question for a hotel guest to ask security staff, and Ethan wasn't sure how to respond. "It's honest work," he said carefully. "I'm grateful for it." Grateful. Victoria repeated the word as if it were foreign to her. "When's the last time I felt grateful for anything?" The question seemed directed more to herself than to him, and Ethan realized she'd probably had more wine than he'd initially thought. Still, there was something raw and genuine in her voice that surprised him. "Everyone has things to be grateful for," he said quietly. "Sometimes it just takes the right perspective to see them." Victoria looked at him sharply. "Do they? What if you have everything you thought you wanted, but it all feels empty? What if success tastes like nothing at all?" It was definitely the wine talking now, but Ethan recognized the loneliness in her voice. He'd heard it in his own during the darkest nights in the warehouse when Maya was sleeping, and he was left alone with his failures. "Maybe the problem isn't what you have," he said gently. "Maybe it's what you're missing." "And what am I missing?" Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan glanced around the elegant bar at the other patrons, absorbed in their own conversations about mergers and acquisitions at the careful distance everyone maintained from everyone else. "Connection," he said simply. "Purpose beyond yourself. The feeling that what you do matters to someone other than shareholders." Victoria stared at him, struck by the unexpected wisdom in his words. "You don't talk like typical hotel security." Ethan's smile was rueful. "I wasn't always hotel security." Before Victoria could ask what he'd been before, Marcus approached with the check for her wine. The moment of unexpected intimacy dissolved and the barriers between their worlds reasserted themselves. "Well," Victoria said, signing the check with a flourish. "Thank you for the philosophy lesson." "Thank you for asking," Ethan replied. As Victoria left the bar, she turned back once. "What's your name?" "Ethan. Ethan Collins." "Thank you, Ethan, for the perspective." After she left, Ethan stood in the empty bar for a long moment, wondering what had just happened. Victoria Hale, one of the most powerful women in the city, had seemed genuinely lost, genuinely searching for something her success couldn't provide. It was the last thing he would have expected, and it shifted something in his understanding of the divide between their worlds. The next morning, Victoria woke with a headache that had nothing to do with wine and everything to do with the uncomfortable questions Ethan's words had raised. She tried to focus on her usual routine, checking overnight emails, reviewing market reports, preparing for another day of strategic battles, but her conversation with the security guard kept intruding. Connection. Purpose beyond yourself. The words echoed in her mind as she sat through a meeting about expanding HaleTech's international presence. The numbers were impressive, the projections promising, but all she could think about was Ethan's observation about success tasting like nothing at all. Victoria, her CFO's voice brought her back to the present. Your thoughts on the European rollout timeline? She looked around the table at her executives, all brilliant, all successful, all as disconnected from the real world as she was. I need some air, she said, suddenly standing up. Can we reconvene in an hour? Without waiting for a response, she walked out of the conference room, leaving behind a table full of confused but accommodating faces. They were used to her decisive leadership, not this sudden uncertainty. Victoria found herself on the building's executive terrace looking out over the city she'd conquered, but never really seen. Somewhere down there, Ethan Collins was probably sleeping after his night shift, maybe with the sick child she'd glimpsed that stormy evening. Somehow, their brief conversation had opened a door in her mind that she couldn't close. She pulled out her phone and called James. I want to do something different. Different how? I want HaleTech to start a community outreach program. Job training, maybe. Or assistance for families in crisis. There was a pause. Victoria, we already have charitable giving programs. Very efficient tax write-offs. No, not charity. Something hands-on, something real. I want to actually help people, not just write checks. Okay, James said slowly. Where is this coming from? Victoria looked out at the city again, thinking about invisible people and empty success and security guards who spoke like philosophers. I think I've been living in a tower too long, she said. It's time I came down and saw what the world actually looks like. Meanwhile, Ethan was indeed sleeping, but restlessly. Maya was at school, their tiny room was quiet, but his mind kept returning to his conversation with Victoria Hale. There had been something unexpected in her eyes, a hunger that had nothing to do with business or success. She'd seemed genuinely interested in his perspective, genuinely searching for something more meaningful than quarterly profits. He thought about their brief exchange, about the moment when the careful barriers of their respective roles had fallen away, and they'd simply been two people talking about what mattered. It had been the most honest conversation he'd had in months, and the fact that it was with someone from her world made it even more surprising. When Maya came home from school that afternoon, chattering excitedly about an art project she'd started, Ethan felt the familiar surge of love and protectiveness that kept him going through everything. This was his purpose, his connection, his reason for fighting through each difficult day. Daddy, can we get colored pencils? Maya asked, showing him a drawing she'd started. Mrs. Peterson says I'm really good at art. Ethan looked at the drawing, a simple house with smoke curling from the chimney, two stick figures holding hands in front of it. It was titled, Me and Daddy's New Home, in crayon letters. Of course, sweetheart. We'll get you the best colored pencils we can afford. As Maya hugged him tightly, Ethan thought about Victoria's question from the night before, what was she missing? Looking at his daughter's radiant smile, he knew the answer. She was missing this, the pure, uncomplicated love that came from being truly needed by another person. The sense that your existence made someone else's life better, brighter, more complete. But he also recognized that Victoria's question had awakened something in him too. For months, he'd been focused solely on survival, finding shelter, food safety for Maya. But Maya's recovery, the temporary stability of their housing situation, and the steady income from his security job had given him space to think beyond just getting through each day. Maybe it was time to start thinking about the future again, about what kind of life he wanted to build for his daughter. And maybe, just maybe, their paths would cross again with the lonely executive who'd asked such penetrating questions about the nature of satisfaction and success. Neither Victoria nor Ethan could have predicted that their next encounter would come much sooner than either expected, and under circumstances that would test everything they thought they knew about courage, dignity, and the true meaning of wealth. The colored pencils cost $12, a small fortune by Ethan's current standards, but worth every penny to see Maya's face light up when he placed them in her small hands. They sat together on his narrow bed in their temporary housing room, Maya carefully shading her drawing, while Ethan prepared for another night shift at the Meridian. "Look, Daddy," Maya said, holding up her artwork. She'd transformed the simple crayon house into something magical, with golden windows that seemed to glow and a garden full of flowers in every color imaginable. "It's our dream house." Ethan studied the drawing, his throat tight with emotion. Despite everything they'd been through, his daughter still believed in dreams, still saw beauty where others might only see struggle. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. We'll put it right here on the wall." As he taped the drawing to the cinderblock wall, Maya wrapped her arms around his waist. "When we get our real house, can we have a garden like that?" "Yes," Ethan promised, though he had no idea how he'd make it happen. "Someday we'll have a garden, and you can plant whatever flowers you want." The walk to the Meridian Hotel had become routine, but tonight felt different somehow. The air carried the crisp promise of autumn, and the city seemed more alive, more electric. Ethan nodded to the doorman as he entered through the staff entrance, changing into his uniform in the small security office behind the main desk. "Busy night ahead," Henderson warned as they reviewed the evening's schedule. "Private party in the grand ballroom, some tech industry awards ceremony. Lot of high-profile guests, so stay sharp." Through the lobby's tall windows, Ethan could see luxury cars arriving, disgorging passengers in evening wear that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The tech industry elite were gathering to celebrate their latest achievements, to network and compete, and display their success like peacocks showing their plumage. Victoria arrived fashionably late, as was her custom. She'd spent an hour choosing her dress, a midnight blue creation that hugged her curves while maintaining an air of professional elegance. Her hair was swept up in an intricate chignon diamond earrings catching the light with each turn of her head. She looked every inch the successful executive, but inside she felt increasingly hollow. The award ceremony was exactly what she'd expected, a parade of self-congratulation wrapped in corporate speak about innovation and disruption. Victoria accepted her company's award for Outstanding Achievement in Data Security, with the appropriate gracious smile, delivering a speech about teamwork and vision that felt like reading someone else's words. "Brilliant as always," James murmured as she returned to their table. "The Henderson acquisition announcement went over well too." Victoria nodded absently, her attention caught by the scene beyond the ballroom's windows. In the lobby, she could see the security guard Ethan making his rounds, with the same quiet dignity she'd noticed before. Something about his presence grounded her, reminded her that there was a real world beyond these walls of artificial celebration. "I need some air," she told James, standing abruptly. "The networking reception starts in 20 minutes. "Handle it," Victoria said, already moving toward the door. "I'll be back." The lobby was quieter than the ballroom, the marble surfaces reflecting the soft lighting in gentle pools. Ethan was checking the main entrance when Victoria approached her heels, clicking softly on the polished floor. "Congratulations," he said simply when he saw her approaching. "I heard your company won an award tonight." Victoria was surprised he knew, surprised he cared enough to mention it. "Thank you. Though sometimes I wonder what we're really celebrating." "Success is success," Ethan replied carefully. "Is it?" Victoria moved closer, and Ethan caught a hint of her perfume, expensive, sophisticated, but somehow lonely. What if success just means you've gotten very good at something that doesn't matter? Before Ethan could respond, the hotel's main doors burst open with violent force. 3 men entered fast and hard, their faces covered by dark ski masks, their intentions immediately clear from the weapons they carried. The largest of them, clearly the leader, gestured sharply toward the front desk. "Everyone on the ground, now!" The few guests in the lobby screamed and dropped to the marble floor. The desk clerk's face went white with terror as one of the robbers vaulted over the counter, grabbing for the cash drawer and demanding access to the safe. Ethan's training kicked in immediately. His first instinct was to reach for his radio to call for backup and secure the scene. But as he moved, the leader spotted him swinging his weapon in Ethan's direction. "You security, on the ground, with the rest of them." For a split second, Ethan considered compliance. He had Maya to think about, a daughter who needed him alive and whole. But then he saw Victoria frozen in shock, just a few feet away, her evening gown making her stand out like a beacon against the marble floor. The leader was already turning toward her, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "Well, well," the man said, his voice muffled by the mask, but still carrying clearly. "Victoria Hale, this is our lucky night, boys. You know how much a tech executive is worth." Everything slowed down in Ethan's mind. He saw the weapon turning toward Victoria, saw her face pale with understanding, saw her hands shake as she realized she'd become the primary target. In that moment, all his calculations about survival and safety for Maya collapsed into a single crystalline truth. He couldn't stand by and watch someone die when he had the power to prevent it. Ethan moved without conscious decision, his body acting on pure instinct. He launched himself between Victoria and the gunman, just as the weapon fired, the sharp crack echoing through the marble lobby like thunder. Pain exploded through his shoulder, spinning him around, but his momentum carried him into the robber, knocking the man off balance. "Run!" Ethan shouted to Victoria as he grappled with the leader. "Get out of here!" But Victoria couldn't move, couldn't process what she was seeing. This man, this security guard who barely knew her, had just taken a bullet meant for her. Blood was spreading across his white uniform shirt, but he was still fighting, still trying to protect her. The other 2 robbers were shouting their plan, falling apart in the face of unexpected resistance. One was still behind the counter, struggling with the safe, while the other was trying to control the panicking guests. The leader was bigger than Ethan, but Ethan fought with the desperate strength of a man who'd already lost everything once and refused to lose anything more. "I said run!" Ethan gasped, his shoulder screaming with pain as he tried to keep the weapon pointed away from Victoria. Finally, Victoria's paralysis broke. But instead of running for safety, she did something that surprised even her. She grabbed the heavy crystal vase from the reception desk and brought it down hard on the back of the leader's head. The man crumpled his weapon, skittering across the marble floor. The sound of sirens was growing closer now, the hotel's silent alarm having summoned help. The other 2 robbers, seeing their leader down and hearing the approaching police, made the decision to flee. They ran for the back exit, leaving their unconscious partner behind. Ethan slumped against the reception desk, his face gray with pain and blood loss. Victoria knelt beside him, her expensive dress pooling around her, as she pressed her hands against his wounded shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. "Why?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you do that? You don't even know me." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes still clear despite the pain. "Yes, I do," he said quietly. "I know you're lost. I know you're searching for something real. I know you asked me about connection and purpose." He coughed, wincing. "And I know you're worth saving." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. This man, this stranger who worked nights to support his sick daughter, who lived in temporary housing and counted colored pencils as major purchases, had risked his life for her without hesitation. Meanwhile, she'd spent years building walls around herself, convinced that her success made her valuable while forgetting what true value actually meant. "Stay with me," she pleaded, as his eyes started to flutter closed. "Please, Ethan, stay with me." The paramedics arrived like a small army efficiently taking control of the scene. They worked on Ethan with professional calm while police officers secured the area and took statements. Victoria rode in the ambulance holding Ethan's uninjured hand, whispering prayers to a God she hadn't spoken to since childhood. At the hospital, she paced the waiting room, like a caged animal still in her blood-stained evening gown, her perfect hair disheveled, her makeup streaked with tears. James arrived within an hour, having heard about the incident, through the police scanner that monitored threats to high-profile executives. "Victoria, thank God you're all right," he said, wrapping her in a relieved hug. "When I heard there was a robbery..." "He saved my life," Victoria said, pulling away from James's embrace. "The security guard, Ethan Collins. He threw himself between me and a gun. He could have died." James studied her face, seeing something there he'd never seen before, a raw vulnerability, a crack in the armor she'd worn for so many years. "I'm sure he was just doing his job." "No." Victoria's voice was sharp-cutting. "He wasn't doing his job. His job was to call for backup and protect hotel property. What he did was choose to save a stranger's life at the cost of his own safety." Dr. Chen emerged from the surgical wing, still in her scrubs. Victoria recognized her from that night at the hospital when she'd seen Ethan with his daughter, though she hadn't made the connection then. "How is he?" Victoria asked immediately. "Stable," Dr. Chen replied. "The bullet went through his shoulder, missed the major arteries. He'll need physical therapy, but he should make a full recovery." She paused, studying Victoria's face. "Are you family?" Victoria realized she didn't know how to answer. He saved my life. I'm the reason he's here." Dr. Chen nodded knowingly. "He's been asking about you. Wants to make sure you're all right." "Can I see him?" "He's still sedated, but yes. Room 314. Victoria walked through the hospital corridors, with James trailing behind her heels, echoing on the linoleum floors. The contrast between the hospital's utilitarian atmosphere and the luxury of the hotel couldn't have been starker, but somehow she felt more at home here, more real. Ethan was awake when she entered his room, his shoulder heavily bandaged, but his eyes alert. Maya was there too, curled up in the visitor's chair, her school backpack at her feet. She looked up when Victoria entered, her young face solemn and curious. "Daddy said you were the lady he helped," Maya said simply. Victoria felt her throat tighten. This was the sick child she'd glimpsed that night in the rain, now healthy and bright-eyed, looking at her with the frank assessment that only children possessed. "Yes," Victoria said, moving closer to the bed. "Your daddy is a hero." "I know," Maya replied matter-of-factly. "He's always been my hero." Ethan tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the movement. "You shouldn't have stayed," he told Victoria. "You should have run when I told you to. And let you face 3 armed men alone." Victoria shook her head. "I don't think so. It was stupid. You could have been killed. So could you. And for what? To protect someone you barely know." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his eyes moving between Victoria and his daughter. "Maya," he said gently, "could you go get some juice from the vending machine? I'll give you quarters." Maya took the quarters and skipped out of the room with the resilience of childhood. When she was gone, Ethan looked directly at Victoria. "I know more about you than you think," he said quietly. "I know you're one of the most successful people in the city. I know you've built something important, something that employs thousands of people. I know you're brilliant and driven and accomplished. Victoria felt tears threatening again. But I also know you're lonely. I know you feel empty despite all your success. I know you're searching for something that money can't buy. His voice was gentle but unwavering. And I know that everyone deserves to be saved, especially people who've forgotten they're worth saving. The words broke something open in Victoria's chest. She sank into the chair beside his bed, her composure finally cracking completely. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You have nothing. You live in temporary housing, you work nights for minimum wage, you're raising your daughter alone. By every measure my world uses, you've failed. But you're the one who saved me. You're the one with courage and purpose and connection to what actually matters." Ethan reached out with his good hand covering hers. "Victoria, you think I have nothing because you're looking at the wrong things. I have Maya's laugh every morning. I have the satisfaction of honest work. I have the knowledge that I'm raising a daughter who sees the world as full of possibilities. I have hope for tomorrow, even when today is difficult. But the money, the security..." "Security isn't about money," Ethan interrupted gently. "It's about knowing who you are and what you stand for. It's about being able to look in the mirror and respect the person looking back at you. It's about connections that go deeper than business cards and networking events." Victoria stared at their joined hands, his calloused and scarred from years of physical labor, hers soft and manicured from years of boardroom battles. The contrast should have emphasized their differences, but instead it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I don't know how to do that," she admitted. "I don't know how to connect with people anymore. I've spent so long building walls to protect myself that I've forgotten how to let anyone in." "It's not too late," Ethan said simply. "It's never too late to remember what it feels like to be human." Maya returned with her juice box, studying Victoria with the intensity of a child trying to solve a puzzle. "Are you rich?" she asked with typical childhood directness. "Maya," Ethan warned gently. "It's okay," Victoria said. "Yes, sweetheart. I have a lot of money. Does it make you happy?" The question was so innocent, so straightforward, that it cut through all of Victoria's sophisticated rationalizations and defenses. She looked at this 7-year-old girl who lived in temporary housing, but glowed with contentment, whose father had risked his life for a stranger without expecting anything in return. "No," Victoria said honestly. "It doesn't make me happy." Maya nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Daddy says happiness comes from loving people and helping them, not from having stuff. Your daddy is very wise." "I know. He tells the best stories too. Want to hear one?" For the next hour, Victoria sat in a hospital chair listening to Maya chatter about school and friends and the garden she wanted to plant someday. She watched the interaction between father and daughter, seeing the easy affection, the unguarded love, the simple joy they found in each other's company. James appeared in the doorway, eventually checking his watch, with barely concealed impatience. "Victoria, we should go. You have the Morrison meeting first thing tomorrow, and the press is starting to ask questions about the robbery." The mention of the outside world felt like a splash of cold water. Victoria looked around the hospital room at Ethan, with his bandaged shoulder, at Maya, with her bright smile and second-hand clothes, at the simple human connection that had bloomed in this sterile space, and felt the weight of her other life pressing down on her. "Give me a few more minutes," she told James. "Victoria, the optics of this are important. We need to control the narrative." "I said give me a few minutes." Her voice carried the steel that had made her one of the most feared negotiators in the tech industry. James retreated, and Victoria turned back to Ethan. "He's right, you know. There will be questions, media attention. Your life is about to become very public." Ethan's expression grew troubled. Maya doesn't need that kind of attention. She's just starting to feel stable again. "I'll handle it," Victoria promised. "I'll make sure you and Maya are protected from the media circus." "You don't owe us anything." "Yes, I do." Victoria's voice was fierce. "I owe you my life. And more than that, I owe you for showing me what I've been missing." She stood up, smoothing down her ruined evening gown. "But first, I need to take care of some practical matters. The hospital bills time off work while you recover, making sure Maya is taken care of." "Victoria, no." Ethan's voice was firm despite his weakened state. "I appreciate the offer, but we don't need charity." "It's not charity, it's charity," Ethan repeated gently but firmly. "And it would change things between us. It would turn this into a transaction instead of what it really is." "What is it really?" Victoria asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his eyes serious. "It's two people who needed to find each other. It's a reminder that the most important things in life can't be bought or sold or negotiated. It's proof that courage and kindness still exist in a world that sometimes feels like it's forgotten both." Victoria felt something fundamental shifting inside her chest, like tectonic plates realigning after an earthquake. "I don't know how to be the person who deserves to be saved by someone like you." "You don't have to deserve it," Ethan said simply. "That's not how grace works. You just have to be willing to accept it." Maya had fallen asleep in her chair, her head tilted at an angle that would leave her neck stiff. Victoria found herself moving without thinking, gently adjusting the child's position, smoothing her dark hair away from her face. The gesture felt foreign but natural, like remembering a language she'd once spoken fluently. "She likes you," Ethan observed quietly. "How can you tell?" "She let you touch her. Maya's very cautious around new people. She's learned to be protective of herself." Victoria looked down at the sleeping child, thinking about protection and walls and the different ways people guarded their hearts. "She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. She's the reason I keep fighting, keep believing that tomorrow can be better than today." "And what happens now?" Victoria asked. "You'll recover, go back to work, continue raising Maya. I'll go back to my boardrooms and my acquisitions and my empty penthouse. Pretend this never happened." Ethan shook his head slowly. "I don't think you can pretend this never happened. I don't think either of us can." He was right, and Victoria knew it. Something had changed in the space between the gunshot and this hospital room, something that couldn't be undone or ignored. The walls she'd built around herself had developed cracks, and light was streaming through them, illuminating parts of herself she'd forgotten existed. "I should go," she said finally, though every instinct told her to stay. "Let you rest." "Victoria," Ethan called as she reached the door. "Thank you for staying, for not running when things got dangerous, for seeing me as more than just the hired help." Victoria paused in the doorway, her hand on the frame. "Thank you for showing me that there are still people in the world willing to risk everything for a stranger. Thank you for reminding me what courage actually looks like." As she walked back through the hospital corridors, her heels clicking on the linoleum, Victoria felt like she was walking between two worlds, the one she'd built through ambition and isolation, and the one she'd glimpsed in a hospital room where a wounded man and his daughter had shown her what wealth really meant. James was waiting by the elevator, his expression carefully neutral. "Ready to go?" Victoria nodded, but as the elevator doors closed, she caught her reflection in the polished steel. She looked different somehow, raw, shaken, more real than she'd appeared in years. The perfectly controlled executive was still there, but underneath something new was stirring to life. "Cancel my morning meetings," she said suddenly. "Victoria, the Morrison deal. We'll have to wait." She turned to look at James, this man who'd been her partner for 8 years but had never really known her. Some things are more important than deals. James studied her face with growing concern. "This security guard, this Ethan Collins, you're getting too involved. He did his job, you're grateful, but you can't let it derail everything you've built." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, watching the floor numbers climb toward the lobby. "What if everything I've built isn't worth preserving?" "You don't mean that." "Don't I?" The elevator doors opened, and Victoria stepped into the hospital lobby, where a handful of reporters were already gathering, despite the late hour. "What if I've spent 20 years building the wrong thing?" As they walked toward James's waiting car, Victoria felt the weight of her old life settling back around her shoulders, like an expensive coat that no longer fit properly. Tomorrow she would have to face the board handle, the media manage the crisis that her involvement in the robbery would create. But tonight, she carried with her the memory of a man who'd taken a bullet for a stranger. A little girl who measured happiness in colored pencils and garden dreams, and the uncomfortable realization that everything she'd thought she wanted might have been keeping her from everything she actually needed. The city lights blurred past the car windows as they drove toward her penthouse, but Victoria found herself looking back toward the hospital where Ethan and Maya were probably settling in for the night. Somewhere in the space between the robbery and the recovery room, her carefully ordered world had been turned upside down, and she was beginning to suspect that maybe, just maybe, upside down was exactly where it needed to be. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum when Victoria finally returned home at 3 in the morning. The marble floors that once represented success now seemed cold and lifeless beneath her feet. She kicked off her designer heels, leaving them abandoned in the foyer, and walked barefoot to her floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread out below her like a glittering circuit board, but for the first time in years, she felt disconnected from it all. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, a woman in a blood-stained evening gown, her perfect makeup streaked with tears, her hair disheveled from hours of worry. But what struck her most was her eyes. They looked different, more alive somehow, as if something that had been sleeping for years had finally awakened. Victoria pulled out her phone and scrolled through the dozens of missed calls and messages. Board members expressing concern, business partners offering support, reporters seeking statements, competitors probably celebrating her moment of vulnerability. The machinery of her professional life was already churning, analyzing the robbery for its impact on stock prices and public perception. But all she could think about was Maya's innocent question. "Does it make you happy?" The answer echoed in the silence of her empty penthouse. No. None of it made her happy. The money, the power, the recognition, they were all just elaborate decorations on an increasingly hollow life. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Press conference at 9 a.m. I've drafted a statement positioning you as a victim who showed courage under fire. This could actually boost your public profile if we handle it right." Victoria stared at the message, feeling a familiar revulsion at the way everything, even genuine human moments, got fed into the machine of public relations and market positioning. She typed back, "No press conference." The response came immediately. "Victoria, this isn't optional. The board expects." She turned off her phone without reading the rest. Dawn was breaking over the city when Victoria finally fell asleep, still wearing her ruined gown, curled up on the couch in front of her windows. She dreamed of hospital rooms and colored pencils, of a little girl's laugh, and a man's steady voice saying, "Everyone deserves to be saved." Across town, Ethan was lying awake in his hospital bed, watching the same sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The pain medication had worn off, leaving his shoulder throbbing, but it was a different kind of pain that kept him from sleeping, the ache of knowing that Victoria had returned to her world while he remained in his. Maya was curled up in the visitor's chair, wrapped in a hospital blanket that smelled of industrial detergent and distant suffering. She'd insisted on staying the night, and the nurses had bent the rules for the brave little girl whose father was being called a hero in the morning news reports. Chen appeared in the doorway, chart in hand, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to early rounds. "How's the pain?" she asked, checking his bandages. "Manageable," Ethan replied, which wasn't entirely true, but was as much as he was willing to admit. "And how are you processing what happened? It's not every day someone takes a bullet for a stranger." Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I keep thinking I should feel different somehow, like doing something that dramatic should change you fundamentally. But I feel like the same person I was yesterday." "Maybe that's because you've always been the kind of person who would take a bullet for someone else," Dr. Chen suggested gently. "Maybe what happened didn't change who you are, it just revealed it." Through the window, Ethan could see the city coming to life. People hurrying to work, cars streaming through the streets, the endless motion of a world that kept spinning, regardless of individual acts of courage or compassion. Somewhere out there, Victoria was probably preparing for meetings and phone calls, returning to the life that the robbery had temporarily interrupted. "Do you think people can really change?" he asked Dr. Chen suddenly. She looked up from his chart, studying his face with the careful attention of someone who'd seen people at their most vulnerable. "I think people can remember who they used to be before the world taught them to be someone else. Sometimes it takes something dramatic to strip away all the layers we've accumulated and show us our original selves." Maya stirred in her chair, stretching like a sleepy kitten before opening her eyes and smiling at her father. "Good morning, Daddy. Does your shoulder feel better?" "Much better, sweetheart. Can we go home today?" Home. The word hung in the air between them, carrying all its complex meaning. The temporary housing facility wasn't really home, but it was where they'd been building their new life one careful step at a time. "Dr. Chen will let us know," Ethan said diplomatically. "Actually," Dr. Chen interjected, "I think we can discharge you this afternoon. You'll need to take it easy for a few weeks, no heavy lifting physical therapy starting next week. But there's no medical reason to keep you here." "What about work?" Ethan asked, sudden worry creeping into his voice. "I just started at the hotel. I can't afford to lose this job." "I think you'll find that won't be a problem," Dr. Chen said with a slight smile. "The hotel's insurance covers your medical expenses and lost wages. Plus, there's been quite a bit of media attention. You might want to prepare yourself for that." As if summoned by her words, Maya pointed excitedly at the small television mounted in the corner of the room. "Daddy, you're on TV." The morning news was running footage from the robbery grainy security camera video that showed Ethan throwing himself between Victoria and the gunman, the brief struggle, Victoria striking the robber with the vase. The anchor's voice provided commentary. "Single father working as hotel security showed remarkable courage last night, potentially saving the life of tech executive Victoria Hale." Ethan reached for the remote, turning down the volume, but not before he caught a glimpse of Victoria emerging from the hospital the night before, her face drawn with worry and exhaustion. Even disheveled and shaken, she was striking. But what stayed with him was the vulnerability in her eyes, the crack in her armor that had let her humanity show through. "You're famous, Daddy," Maya said with delight. "Fame isn't always a good thing, sweetheart," Ethan replied, thinking about the reporters who would probably be waiting outside the hospital, the questions that would invade their carefully reconstructed privacy. His phone, which had been mercifully quiet throughout the night, began buzzing with calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Reporters probably, or people who wanted to turn his moment of instinct into their story. He turned it off, feeling suddenly protective of the simple life he and Maya had been building. "Mr. Collins." A young woman appeared in the doorway, notebook in hand, camera crew trailing behind her. "I'm Sarah Martinez from Channel 7 News. Could we have a moment to talk about what happened last night?" "No," Ethan said firmly. "My daughter and I value our privacy. Just a few questions about what motivated you to risk your life for Ms. Hale." I said no. Ethan's voice carried an authority that made the reporter step back. "Please leave." "Dr. Son," Chen intervened, ushering the news crew out with professional authority. "This is a medical facility, not a press conference. You'll need to leave immediately." When they were gone, Maya looked at her father with curious eyes. "Why didn't you want to talk to them, Daddy?" "Because what happened last night wasn't about getting attention or being on TV," Ethan explained gently. "It was about doing the right thing when someone needed help. And doing the right thing shouldn't be about getting credit for it. Like when you help me with my homework and don't tell everyone you're smart." Ethan smiled, marveling at his daughter's ability to cut through complexity to find simple truth. Exactly like that. Meanwhile, Victoria was facing her own media circus. She'd woken to find reporters camped outside her building's satellite trucks lined up on the street, and a stack of interview requests that Rebecca had been fielding since dawn. The Haletech board had called an emergency meeting, and James was in full crisis management mode. "The stock actually went up 3 points overnight," James reported, as Victoria emerged from her bedroom, dressed in her usual armor of expensive suit and perfect makeup. "The public loves a CEO who shows courage under fire. We should capitalize on this." Victoria poured herself coffee, her hands steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "Capitalize on what a man almost died protecting me. This isn't a marketing opportunity." "Everything is a marketing opportunity if you handle it right. The narrative writes itself. Successful executive shows grace under pressure, forms unlikely bond with working-class hero. It's human interest gold." "Stop." Victoria's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Just stop. Ethan Collins isn't a character in our corporate story. He's a real person who has a real daughter and a real life that he's trying to rebuild. I won't let you turn his courage into our profit." James studied her face with growing concern. "Victoria, I've never seen you like this. You're letting emotion cloud your judgment." "Maybe my judgment has been clouded for years, and I'm finally seeing clearly." The board meeting was a disaster from Victoria's perspective, though the board members seemed thrilled with the positive publicity. They wanted her to do interviews, write an op-ed about workplace courage, maybe even author a book about leadership under pressure. Each suggestion made Victoria feel sicker. "With respect," she said finally, interrupting the marketing director's presentation about leveraging the incident, "I think we're missing the point." The room fell silent. Victoria rarely interrupted meetings, and when she did, it was usually to cut through inefficiency, not to question strategy. "What point is that?" asked Richard Morrison, the board chairman. "The point that there are people in our community who risk their lives for strangers, while we sit in boardrooms figuring out how to profit from their sacrifice. The point that a man who works night security for minimum wage showed more courage and character in 30 seconds than I've shown in 20 years of business." The silence stretched uncomfortably. These people knew Victoria as decisive, strategic, focused on results. This philosophical musing was foreign to them. "Victoria Tone," Morrison said carefully. "Perhaps you should take some time off. Process what you've been through. Post-traumatic stress can affect judgment." "My judgment is fine," Victoria interrupted. "What's affected is my priorities. She stood up, ignoring the surprised faces around the polished conference table. I need to think about what kind of company we want to be, what kind of legacy we want to leave. And I need to do that thinking somewhere other than this room. Victoria walked out of the meeting, leaving behind a table full of confused executives and a rapidly developing crisis of confidence in their CEO's stability. But for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. Instead of returning to her office, Victoria found herself driving toward the hospital. She'd told herself she was just checking on Ethan's condition, making sure he was receiving proper care. But she knew the truth was more complicated. She needed to see him again, needed to understand the man who'd changed her world in the space of a heartbeat. The media attention had found the hospital too. News vans lined the street, reporters doing live broadcasts about the hero security guard and the tech executive's narrow escape. Victoria slipped in through a side entrance using her knowledge of the building's layout from her previous visit. She found Ethan's room empty except for the lingering scent of antiseptic and the rumpled bedding that spoke of a difficult night. Panic fluttered in her chest until a nurse explained that he'd been moved to a private room for privacy. Room 414 was quieter, tucked away from the main corridor. Victoria knocked gently before entering, finding Ethan sitting up in bed while Maya worked on a new drawing at the bedside table. This one showed two stick figures standing together, one tall, one small, with the word "brave" written in careful child letters across the top. "You came back," Ethan said, and Victoria heard something in his voice that made her chest tight. "I wanted to make sure you were all right. The media attention must be difficult." "We're managing," Ethan replied. "Maya thinks being on TV is exciting, but she doesn't understand what it really means." Maya looked up from her drawing, her face lighting up when she saw Victoria. "Ms. Victoria, look what I drew." Victoria examined the picture, recognizing the larger figure as Ethan, but puzzled by the smaller one. "Is this you?" she asked Maya. "No, it's you," Maya said proudly. "See, you're helping Daddy be brave. That's why you're both heroes." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She saw herself in Maya's drawing not as the powerful executive who needed saving, but as someone who'd found her own courage in a moment of crisis. It was a version of herself she didn't recognize but somehow longed to become. "Maya, sweetheart," Ethan said gently. "Could you go find Dr. Chen? I need to ask her about going home today." When Maya skipped out of the room, Ethan turned to Victoria with serious eyes. "How are you handling all this? The media attention, the questions." "Honestly, I feel like I'm having an identity crisis. Yesterday, I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted. Today, I can't shake the feeling that I've been living someone else's life." Ethan nodded slowly. Sometimes it takes a shock to wake us up to who we really are underneath all the roles we play. "And who am I underneath it all?" Victoria asked, surprised by the vulnerability in her own voice. "I think you're someone who cares more than she allows herself to show. Someone who's been hurt and built walls to protect herself. Someone who's forgotten that strength comes from connection, not isolation." Victoria sank into the visitor's chair, feeling the weight of his words. "I don't know how to tear down walls I spent 20 years building." "One brick at a time," Ethan said simply, "and you don't have to do it alone." "Is that an offer?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "Victoria, our worlds are very different. You have responsibilities, obligations, a life that exists at a level I can barely imagine. And I have Maya to think about, a future to rebuild with very limited resources." "But," Victoria sensed there was more, "but I also think we found each other for a reason. Maybe not to fix each other's problems, but to help each other remember what's important." Before Victoria could respond, Maya returned with Dr. Chen, who confirmed that Ethan could be discharged that afternoon. The conversation turned to practical matters, follow-up appointments, physical therapy schedules, restrictions on his activities. "What about work?" Ethan asked. "When can I return to the hotel?" Dr. Chen exchanged a glance with Victoria before answering. "Actually, Mr. Collins, there have been some developments you should know about. The hotel has put you on paid administrative leave pending a full investigation of the security protocols. It's standard procedure, but it could take several weeks." Victoria saw the worry flash across Ethan's face, the quick calculation of rent and groceries, and Maya's needs that couldn't wait for bureaucratic procedures. "There's also been an outpouring of public support, Dr. Chen continued. People want to help. The hospital has been fielding calls all morning from individuals and organizations offering assistance." "What kind of assistance?" Ethan asked cautiously. "Job offers scholarships for Maya donations." Dr. Chen paused. "It's quite overwhelming, actually. You might want to consider having someone help you sort through it all." Victoria felt an idea forming a way to bridge the gap between their worlds that didn't involve charity or condescension. "Ethan, what if I helped you navigate all this, not as your benefactor, but as your friend? Someone who understands how to handle media attention and public interest." Ethan studied her face carefully. "And what would you get out of it?" The question was direct, honest, cutting through any pretense of pure altruism. Victoria appreciated that about him, his refusal to accept easy answers or comfortable lies. "I'd get to remember what it feels like to use my skills for something that matters," she said honestly. "I'd get to spend time with people who see the world clearly instead of through spreadsheets and market analyses. I'd get to help my daughter learn what real courage looks like." "Maya isn't your daughter," Ethan pointed out gently. "No, but she could be my teacher. You both could." Maya bounced back into the room carrying a juice box and wearing a hospital bracelet that someone had decorated with stickers. "Daddy, the nice lady at the desk, said there are people outside who want to talk to us. Can we be on TV again?" "We'll see, sweetheart," Ethan said diplomatically. Victoria made a decision that surprised even her. "Maya, how would you like to avoid all those reporters and come have lunch at my house instead?" "Victoria?" Ethan said carefully. "That's very kind, but not charity," Victoria interrupted. "Friendship. And honestly, I could use the company. My house is very big and very quiet, and I think Maya might like the view." Maya looked between the adults, sensing undercurrents she couldn't quite understand, but recognizing an adventure when she heard one. "Can we, Daddy, please?" Ethan hesitated, and Victoria could see the war between pride and practicality playing out across his features. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But just for lunch." Getting out of the hospital without encountering the media required some creativity. Victoria used her influence to arrange for them to leave through the service entrance where her driver was waiting with the car. Maya was enchanted by the leather seats and the partition between them and the front seat, chattering excitedly about everything she saw through the tinted windows. "Is this really your car?" she asked Victoria. "It's a company car, but yes, I use it every day." "It's like a princess car," Maya declared, then turned to her father. "Daddy, does this mean Ms. Victoria is a princess?" Victoria laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had in months. "Not quite, sweetheart. More like a businesswoman who forgot how to have fun." The penthouse elevator ride was another adventure for Maya, who pressed her nose against the glass walls as the city fell away below them. When the doors opened directly into Victoria's living space, Maya's eyes went wide with wonder. "You live in the sky," she whispered, awed. Victoria saw her home through Maya's eyes, the soaring ceilings, the wall of windows, the expensive furniture that suddenly seemed cold and uninviting. It was impressive, certainly, but it wasn't warm. It wasn't the kind of place where a child would feel comfortable drawing pictures, or a father would feel at ease telling bedtime stories. "Would you like to see the view from the terrace?" Victoria offered. They spent the afternoon on her private terrace, Maya exclaiming over every building and landmark she recognized, while Ethan sat quietly taking in the perspective that Victoria's wealth provided. The city spread out below them like a map, all connections and possibilities, but Victoria found herself focusing on her guests instead of the view. Watching Maya discover her world was like seeing everything fresh again. The child found magic in the simplest things, the way the elevator made her ears pop, the fish tank built into the living room wall, the fact that Victoria had a refrigerator that made ice automatically. "This is the biggest house I've ever seen," Maya announced while they ate lunch on the terrace. "Do you ever get lonely up here all by yourself?" The question was innocent, but it cut straight to the heart of Victoria's existence. "Sometimes," she admitted. "You should get a dog," Maya suggested seriously. "Dogs make everything better." "Maya," Ethan warned gently, "not everyone wants a dog." "But dogs are good for lonely people," Maya insisted. "Mrs. Peterson at school told us that. She said pets teach you how to love something more than yourself." Victoria felt tears threaten at the child's simple wisdom. "That's very good advice, Maya." After lunch, Maya curled up on Victoria's expensive couch for a nap, exhausted by the excitement of the day. Victoria covered her with a throw blanket, while Ethan stood at the windows looking out at the city he knew from ground level. "This is how you see the world," he said quietly. "From up here, all the problems look small and manageable." "They're not, though," Victoria replied, joining him at the window. "They just look that way because I'm insulated from them." "Are you going to come down from your tower?" Ethan asked, echoing Maya's fairy tale from their first night in temporary housing. Victoria looked at him, this man, who'd entered her life like an earthquake, shifting the foundations of everything she'd built. "I don't know how. This penthouse, the company, the life I've created, it's all connected. I can't just walk away from my responsibilities." "No one's asking you to walk away, but maybe you can find a way to use what you have to make a difference in the real world." "Like what?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering. "You talked about community outreach job training programs. What if you actually did it? What if you used Hailtech's resources to create real opportunities for people who need them?" "The board would never approve it. They'd say it's not cost-effective, not our core mission." "Then maybe it's time to change the mission." The idea was radical, revolutionary, probably impossible. It would mean restructuring the company's priorities, convincing shareholders to accept lower profits in service of higher purposes, risking everything she'd built on the belief that business could be a force for good rather than just a wealth generation machine. "It would be career suicide," Victoria said, but she could hear the possibility in her own voice. "Or it would be the first authentic thing you've done in 20 years. Maya stirred on the couch, opening sleepy eyes and smiling at the two adults. "Are you talking about important grown-up things?" she asked. "Very important," Victoria confirmed. "Good. Daddy says important conversations are how things get better." As the afternoon stretched into evening, Victoria found herself reluctant to let them leave. She'd had more genuine conversations in a few hours with Ethan and Maya than she'd had in months with her business associates. They made her penthouse feel less like a monument to isolation and more like a home, but eventually, practical concerns intruded. Maya needed to get ready for school the next day, and Ethan needed rest to recover from his injuries. Victoria arranged for her driver to take them back to their temporary housing, but as they prepared to leave, she felt a familiar hollowness returning. "Victoria," Ethan said, as they waited for the elevator. "Thank you for today. For Maya especially. She's been through so much uncertainty lately that today felt like a gift. Thank you for letting me be part of it, Victoria replied. I haven't felt this connected to anything in a very long time. Maya hugged Victoria goodbye, her small arms fierce around Victoria's waist. Will we see you again? She asked. I hope so, sweetheart. Good, because I think you need us as much as we need you. After they left, Victoria stood alone in her penthouse, surrounded by all her beautiful, expensive, empty things. Maya's words echoed in the silence, cutting through years of carefully constructed justifications and revealing a truth Victoria had been avoiding. She did need them. She needed Ethan's steady wisdom and Maya's innocent clarity. She needed their reminder of what mattered, what was real, what was worth fighting for. She walked to her window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Somewhere down there, Ethan was probably helping Maya with her homework, while they shared a simple dinner in their tiny temporary room. It wasn't much by her standards, but it was rich in all the ways that mattered. Victoria pulled out her phone and called James, who answered on the first ring. Thank God, he said immediately. The board is in crisis mode. Where have you been? Thinking, Victoria replied. James, we need to talk. Tomorrow morning, first thing, about the future direction of Hailtech. What about it? Victoria looked at her reflection in the window, seeing not the powerful executive she'd been that morning, but someone new, someone who was just beginning to understand what it meant to be truly wealthy. We're going to change everything, she said simply. The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes, but Victoria felt more certain than she had about anything in years. Ethan had saved her life in that hotel lobby, but the real rescue was happening now in the quiet revolution of a heart that had finally remembered how to feel. The morning meeting with James began exactly as Victoria had expected, with resistance, confusion, and barely concealed concern for her mental state. She sat across from him in her office, the same space where she'd made countless strategic decisions over the years, but everything felt different now. The view from her windows no longer represented dominance over the city below. It represented distance from the people she'd spent her career overlooking. Let me understand this correctly. James said, his voice carefully measured. You want to restructure Hailtech as a social enterprise. You want to use 30% of our annual profits to fund job training programs, affordable housing initiatives, and community development projects. That's exactly what I want, Victoria replied calmly. The shareholders will revolt. The board will vote you out. Victoria, this isn't just radical, it's business suicide. Victoria had expected this reaction, had spent the sleepless night after Ethan and Maya's visit preparing for it. What if they don't revolt? What if there are enough people who understand that businesses have responsibilities beyond profit margins? You're talking about theory, not reality. In the real world, a security guard working for minimum wage risked his life to save mine without expecting anything in return. In the real world, a 7-year-old girl living in temporary housing has more wisdom about what makes people happy than anyone in our boardroom. Maybe it's time we learned from the real world instead of hiding from it. James leaned back in his chair, studying Victoria's face with the careful attention of someone trying to diagnose a sudden illness. This is about him, isn't it? This security guard, Ethan Collins. You're making massive corporate decisions based on a traumatic experience and some misguided sense of gratitude. This is about me finally understanding what I've been missing, Victoria corrected. And yes, Ethan and Maya helped me see it, but the emptiness was there long before I met them. I've been successful by every metric that matters to our world, but I've been failing by every metric that actually matters. And their conversation was interrupted by Rebecca's voice through the intercom. Ms. Hale, Mr. Collins is here to see you. Victoria's heart jumped unexpectedly. Send him in." Ethan entered wearing the same clothes from the hospital, his arm still in a sling, but his bearing steady and dignified. He nodded politely to James before addressing Victoria. "I'm sorry to interrupt your meeting, but I needed to talk to you about something important." James started to excuse himself, but Victoria gestured for him to stay. "What is it, Ethan?" "It's about the media attention, the donations, all the offers of help. Maya and I talked about it last night, and we've made a decision." He paused, his eyes serious. "We can't accept any of it." Victoria felt a sinking sensation in her chest. "Why not?" "Because it changes the meaning of what happened. What I did wasn't about getting rewarded or receiving charity. It was about doing what anyone should do when another person is in danger. If we start accepting money and gifts and opportunities because of it, then it becomes a transaction instead of what it really was." "And what was it really?" Victoria asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "It was one human being helping another, nothing more, nothing less." James cleared his throat. "Mr. Collins, I appreciate your principles, but refusing help when you clearly need it isn't noble, it's foolish. You have a daughter to think about." Ethan turned to James with the same steady dignity that had impressed Victoria from their first conversation. "I am thinking about my daughter. I'm thinking about what kind of man I want her to see when she looks at her father. I want her to see someone who helps others because it's right, not because it pays well." "And what about the people who want to help you?" Victoria asked quietly. "What about their need to do something good, to be part of something meaningful?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "There's a difference between helping someone and turning them into your project. I'm grateful for people's kindness, but Maya and I need to rebuild our lives with our own hands. Otherwise, we're not really living. We're just being managed." Victoria felt a sharp pain in her chest, recognizing herself in his words. Wasn't that exactly what her wealth had done to her, turned her into someone who was managed rather than someone who truly lived? "What if there was a way for people to help that didn't make you a charity case?" she asked suddenly. "What if instead of giving you things, they gave you opportunities to earn what you need?" "What do you mean?" Victoria looked at James, seeing his expression of growing alarm, then back at Ethan. "What if HailTech created a job training program, not just for you, but for people in situations like yours? Real jobs with real wages, not charity positions but actual careers with advancement opportunities." "Victoria," James warned, "we've discussed this." "What kind of jobs?" Ethan asked, ignoring James's interruption. "Technology support, data analysis, system administration. The kinds of skills that can provide real stability, real futures. We'd provide the training, the equipment, the support, but you'd earn everything through your own efforts." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria could see him weighing pride against pragmatism, dignity against opportunity. "How many people?" he asked finally. "How many do you think need it? In this city, thousands. People who lost jobs in the recession, veterans who can't find work, single parents trying to support their families, people aging out of the foster system." Ethan's voice gained strength as he spoke. "There are so many people who just need a chance to prove what they can do." Victoria felt something electric running through her veins, a sensation she hadn't experienced since the early days of building HailTech, the thrill of creating something that mattered. "Then we'll start with 1,000, she said decisively. "Full-time positions, benefits, childcare support for parents, housing assistance during the training period." "The cost would be enormous," James protested. "The board would never—" "The board works for the shareholders, and I'm the largest shareholder," Victoria interrupted. "And I've decided this is what I want my money to build." Over the following weeks, Victoria threw herself into the project with the same intensity she'd once reserved for acquisitions and market expansion. She worked 18-hour days, but instead of feeling drained, she felt energized in ways she'd forgotten were possible. The board fought her as expected. 3 members resigned in protest, calling her decision fiscally irresponsible and dangerously idealistic. The business press was divided. Some called her transformation, inspiring others suggested she was having a breakdown. Stock prices fluctuated wildly as investors tried to decide whether Hailtech's new direction represented visionary leadership or corporate suicide. Victoria found she didn't care about the stock price for the first time in her adult life. Ethan became an unofficial consultant on the program, helping Victoria understand the real needs of the people they were trying to reach. His insight proved invaluable. He knew which barriers were real and which were just assumptions, which approaches would be seen as patronizing, and which would be embraced as genuine opportunities. The hardest part isn't the job training, he explained during one of their planning sessions. It's helping people believe they deserve better than they've had. When you've been knocked down enough times, you start to think staying down is safer than risking another fall. They were meeting in Victoria's office, the same space where she'd once focused solely on profit margins and competitive advantage. Now the walls were covered with charts showing enrollment numbers, success rates, and individual stories of transformation. Maya was there too, working on homework at a small table Victoria had installed for their increasingly frequent meetings. The child's presence had transformed the sterile corporate environment into something warmer, more human. "Ms. Victoria," Maya said suddenly, looking up from her math worksheet, "why do some people have so much money and other people don't have any?" It was the kind of question adults spent careers avoiding, but Maya asked it with the direct curiosity that cut through all pretense. "That's a complicated question, sweetheart," Victoria replied. "Sometimes it's because people work hard and get lucky. Sometimes it's because they were born into families that already had money. Sometimes it's just random chance." "But is it fair?" Victoria looked at this 7-year-old girl who'd lived in a warehouse and temporary housing, but still believed in gardens and dreams, whose father had risked his life for a stranger without expecting reward. "No," Victoria said honestly. "It's not fair. But maybe people who have more than they need can use it to help make things more fair for others. Like what you're doing with the job program. Exactly like that." Maya nodded seriously and returned to her homework, satisfied with the answer in the way that only children could be. "She's going to change the world someday," Victoria told Ethan. "She already has," he replied quietly. "She changed yours." The job training program launched 6 months after the robbery in a converted warehouse that Victoria had purchased and renovated specifically for the purpose. The space was bright and modern, equipped with the latest technology, but designed to feel welcoming rather than intimidating. The first graduating class included former construction workers, displaced retail employees, single mothers, and veterans. Ethan was among them, having completed training in systems administration while his shoulder healed. Victoria attended every graduation ceremony, shaking hands with each graduate, learning their names and their stories. "This is Marcus," Ethan said, introducing Victoria to a classmate during the reception following their graduation. "He's a single father too, 3 kids under 10. Marcus was a soft-spoken man in his 30s, his handshake firm despite obvious nervousness about meeting the CEO. "Mr. Collins told me you started this program because of what happened at the hotel," Marcus said. "I just wanted to say thank you. This opportunity, it's going to change everything for my family." Victoria had heard similar thanks from dozens of graduates, but each one still moved her. "What will you do now?" "I've got a position with a tech company downtown, good salary, room for advancement. My kids will be able to stay in their school, keep their friends. For the first time in 2 years, I can plan for the future instead of just surviving day to day. After the reception, Victoria and Ethan walked through the training facility together, their footsteps echoing in the now empty classrooms. Maya ran ahead of them, her voice carrying back as she chattered to herself about something she'd learned in school that day. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "That night at the hotel, taking the bullet, everything that followed." Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her. "Do you regret staying not running when I told you to?" Victoria considered the question seriously. The past 6 months had been the most challenging of her career. She'd lost board members, faced shareholder revolts, endured media scrutiny that ranged from admiring to scathing. Her personal life had been turned upside down as she'd gradually dismantled the walls that had protected her from genuine human connection. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret any of it." "Then you have your answer." They continued walking until they reached the facility's main entrance, where floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto the city. It was the same view Victoria had once enjoyed from her penthouse, but from here at ground level, everything looked different. "Maya asked me something yesterday," Ethan said quietly. "What was that?" "She asked if you were going to marry me." Victoria felt her heart skip a beat. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that some questions are too important to answer without thinking very carefully." When Victoria turned to look at him, this man who'd entered her life like lightning, illuminating corners of her heart she'd forgotten existed. Over the months of working together, their relationship had deepened, from gratitude to friendship, to something neither of them had dared to name. "And have you thought carefully?" she asked. "Every day, for 6 months. Maya came running back to them, her face bright with excitement. "Daddy, Miss Victoria, look." She held up a dandelion she'd found growing through a crack in the sidewalk. "It's like the flowers in my drawing. It found a way to grow, even when everything was hard." Victoria knelt down to Maya's level, accepting the small flower with the solemnity it deserved. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. And you're right, sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the most difficult places. Like how you and Daddy found each other when everything was scary." Victoria looked up at Ethan, seeing her own emotions reflected in his eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "Exactly like that." 1 year later, Victoria stood before a mirror in what had once been her cold, empty penthouse, but was now a warm home filled with laughter and love. Maya's artwork covered the refrigerator, Ethan's books were scattered across the coffee table, and a golden retriever named Hope, Maya's idea, was sleeping peacefully in a patch of afternoon sunlight. Today was special for multiple reasons. HaleTech's job training program was being featured in a national business magazine as a model for corporate social responsibility. The company's stock price had not only recovered, but reached new highs as investors realized that purpose-driven business could be more profitable than traditional models. But more importantly, today, Victoria was marrying the man who'd saved her in more ways than she could count. "You look beautiful, Ms. Victoria," Maya said, adjusting the simple wildflower crown they'd made together that morning. Victoria wore not an expensive designer gown, but a simple white dress that Maya had helped her choose. "Thank you, sweetheart. Are you ready to be my maid of honor?" "I've been ready forever," Maya replied seriously. "Daddy says you've been part of our family since that first night at the hospital." The wedding was small, held in the community garden they'd built next to the job training facility. The guests included program graduates, HaleTech employees, and the handful of board members who'd supported Victoria's transformation of the company. Dr. Chen was there, beaming with pride at how far her patients had come. Even Rebecca had tears in her eyes as she watched her formerly remote boss exchange vows with the man who'd taught her how to feel again. "Ethan," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. You saved my life that night at the hotel, but you did something even more important. You saved my soul. You showed me that real wealth isn't measured in dollars or stock options, but in love, in connection, in the courage to risk everything for what matters most. Ethan's voice was equally steady as he replied, Victoria, you taught me that it's possible to rebuild not just a life, but a purpose. You showed me that one person's courage to change can transform not just themselves, but everyone around them. You proved that love can grow anywhere, even in the hardest places. When they kissed, Maya cheered louder than anyone, her voice carrying pure joy across the garden, where dozens of flowers bloomed in defiance of the urban concrete surrounding them. At the reception, which was held in the same training facility where they'd worked side by side for months, James raised a toast that surprised everyone, including Victoria. A year ago, I thought Victoria had lost her mind, he said, his voice carrying across the room. I thought she was throwing away everything we'd built for some misguided sense of guilt. I was wrong. She wasn't throwing anything away, she was finally building something worth having. The applause was warm and genuine, but Victoria's attention was caught by movement at the edge of the crowd. Marcus, the single father from their first graduating class, was approaching with his 3 children in tow. Mrs. Collins, he said with a shy smile. I wanted to thank you again, and to tell you something important. What's that, Marcus? My oldest daughter, Sarah, she's 10 now. Last week she asked me what she wanted to be when she grows up. Marcus's eyes were bright with tears. She said she wants to be like you, someone who helps other people find their dreams. Victoria felt her own tears threaten as she looked at Sarah, a serious-faced girl who reminded her of Maya in her quiet intensity. That's a wonderful dream, Victoria told Sarah, and I think you're exactly the right person to make it come true. As the evening wore on, Victoria found herself standing in the garden again, watching Ethan teach a group of children, including Maya, how to identify different flowers by their leaves. His shoulder had healed completely, but he moved with the same careful grace that had first caught her attention in the hotel lobby. Having second thoughts, Dr. Chen asked, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. About the marriage, never. Victoria accepted the champagne gratefully. About everything else, every day. But you keep going anyway. I keep going because of them, Victoria said, gesturing toward Ethan and Maya and the growing group of children gathering around them. Because I finally understand that the point isn't to have all the answers, it's to keep asking the right questions. And what are the right questions? Victoria was quiet for a moment, thinking about the journey that had brought her from that sterile penthouse to this blooming garden, from isolation to connection, from success to significance. How can I help? How can I love better? How can I use what I have to make sure other people get what they need? She paused, watching Maya demonstrate the proper way to plant sunflower seeds. And maybe most importantly, what kind of world am I leaving for the children? Dr. Chen raised her glass. To right questions. And to the courage to seek the answers, Victoria replied. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Victoria Collins, she'd legally changed her name that morning, stood surrounded by the community they'd built together. The job training program had expanded to 3 locations with plans for 5 more. Hailtech's stock price was higher than ever, proving that doing good and doing well weren't mutually exclusive. But more than any of that, Victoria had something she'd never thought possible, a family, a purpose, and a love that had grown from the most unlikely beginning. Maya ran over and grabbed Victoria's hand, her face glowing with excitement. Ms. Victoria, Mom, look at all the flowers. They're going to be so beautiful when they grow up. Just like you, sweetheart, Victoria replied, squeezing the small hand in hers. And just like you too, Maya said seriously. Daddy says you were like a seed that forgot how to grow until we helped remind you." Victoria looked over at her husband. The words still felt new and wonderful, who was watching them with the quiet smile she'd grown to love more than any business triumph she'd ever achieved. "I think you're right," she told Maya. "Sometimes we all need reminding that we're capable of more beautiful things than we imagined." As the evening stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the Collins family walked home together, their shadows intertwining on the sidewalk behind them. Victoria's penthouse had been transformed into a real home, but the most important transformation had been in Victoria herself. She had learned that true wealth wasn't about having enough money to buy anything you wanted. It was about having enough love to give more than you kept. She had discovered that real security didn't come from building walls to keep people out, but from building bridges to bring them in. And she had finally understood that the most valuable thing she could leave behind wasn't a business empire or a stock portfolio, but a legacy of lives changed, dreams fulfilled, and love multiplied. 3 years later, the Hailtech Foundation had helped over 5,000 people find new careers and rebuild their lives. Victoria had written a book about the experience, donating all proceeds to expand the program nationwide. Maya had started a children's garden club that taught other kids about growing things in difficult places. And every night, when Victoria tucked Maya into bed in the room they'd designed together, painted sunny yellow with a border of hand-painted flowers, she would remember that first desperate night when she'd seen a man carrying his sick child through the rain. "Tell me the story again," Maya would always ask, "about how you and Daddy found each other." "Once upon a time," Victoria would begin, "there was a princess who lived in a tall tower high above all the troubles of the world. She thought she was safe there, but she was really just alone. And there was a brave knight who had lost everything but never lost hope, who carried his most precious treasure with him wherever he went. And then they saved each other," Maya would finish sleepily. "And then they saved each other," Victoria would agree, kissing her daughter's forehead. "And they all lived bravely ever after." Because that was the truth, Victoria had learned not that life would be easy or perfect, but that it could be meaningful. Not that they would never face challenges again, but that they would face them together. Not that money didn't matter, but that it mattered most when it was used to lift others up. As she turned off Maya's bedroom light and walked down the hallway toward the room she shared with Ethan, Victoria could see the city lights twinkling below their windows. Somewhere out there in shelters and temporary housing, and on dangerous streets, there were other people fighting their own battles, carrying their own precious burdens, hoping for their own chances at redemption. Tomorrow, the Hailtech Foundation would reach out to more of them. Tomorrow, there would be new graduates walking across stages to receive certificates that represented not just job training, but renewed hope. Tomorrow, Maya would plant more seeds in their ever-expanding garden. But tonight, Victoria Collins fell asleep in the arms of the man who'd taught her that the greatest courage wasn't in taking risks with money or market position, but in risking your heart for another human being. And in her dreams, she saw not boardrooms and profit margins, but dandelions growing through concrete flowers blooming in impossible places, and the endless possibility of love taking root wherever it was planted with intention and watered with hope. The poor single father had indeed saved the CEO that night at the Meridian Hotel, but what no one could have predicted was how completely she would save him in return, and how together they would save so many others, proving that the most powerful force in the world wasn't wealth or status or success. It was the simple revolutionary act of one human being choosing to see another as worthy of love.